Hello and welcome. My name is Katie Reneslacis, and I'm a PhD student in Romance, Languages, and Literatures here at Harvard University. And I'm pleased to welcome Professor Tiziana Andina, Professor of Philosophy at the University of Turin, and here today to discuss her recently published book, Transgenerationality, A Philosophy for Future Generations. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you to you for your great and kind invitation.
Pleasure.
It's a pleasure to be here.
So your book takes as its central tenet the principles of alterity. Mm-hmm. And we see this even in the title with the temporal dimension of a philosophy for a future generation. So I'm wondering if you can tell us a little bit about some of the difficulties, expressive, epistemological, ethical, that you may have faced while establishing the alterity of the future generations, while simultaneously making them relatable to the reader, so as to evoke empathy and provoke solidary action.
Thank you for the question, which is intriguing and I think also very intelligent because it takes the spirits of my book very, very clearly. So what can I say in order to explain the point you mentioned in your question? I got especially, I would say, three main difficulty in order to make the notion of future generation clear and established in the literature. I would like to mention three, all of them, and try to explain why they are difficult for a philosopher, but also for a commonsensical point of view. The first interesting point and the first interesting difficulty to me is the commonsensical difficulty, or in other words, the difficulty we see in considering the notion of future generation from the commonsensical point of view. I don't know if you remember a famous joke by Woody Allen, who tried to explain the notion of future generation using a sort of question: why we have to care future generation when they have done anything for us? Okay, and this is pretty much the commonsensical way in which we try to understand and explain the future generation to people. So in order to have a philosophy close to future generation, or a philosophy including the notion of future generation, we have to subvert this commonsensical point of view. We have an important reason in order to include our future generation, the future generation in our philosophy, and this is the first point. The second points are much more technical, I would say, because they are close to ontology and to epistemology on one side, and on the other side they are something which pertain the ethical point of view. So 2 words about these 2 points. What about ontology? As philosophers, we have to justify each new entity we include in our ontology. So the notion of future generation is absolutely a new entity, a figurative entity. So we have to justify the way in which we use this entity, and we have to say and to explain to the reader and to the colleagues how this entity is based in philosophy. And this is one difficulty which is not easy to solve. The other point is the ethical question. In other words, someone might ask why we have to move some resources or important resources for the society in order to sustain future generation and not sustaining actual people living today. Well, I would say that this is an important objection. This is an important point that someone can mention. But the very crucial point to me is the fact that many of the much more important problems that Western society are now facing have some in in some way are related to this particular entity, which are future generation. In other words, problems like climate change or the sustainability of public debt for the state are problems which have the necessity of a confrontation with the question of future generation and the question of a possible justice in our society for future generation.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So one of your arguments that most caught my attention in your book was the construction of the alignment between fictional characters like Don Quixote with the future generations, both of which are non-existent in the spatial temporal dimensions.
Yeah.
And you write that although fictional entities are and will remain abstract, there will come a day when the future generations will come into existence. So my question is, how do we, in our ontology of these future generations, appreciate the potential for conversion from imaginary to actual without reducing them to the more static, diminished, perhaps even dehumanized form of characters in books?
Yeah, that's another intriguing question, because it makes me to reflect to the way in which I try to suggest to solve the problem of future generation in ontology. I would say 2 or 3 things in order to try to respond to your question. The first one is a sort of comparison. My position is that of suggesting a sort of comparison between different kinds of fictional entities. In other words, my idea is that of trying to explain future generation in the same way. In the philosophy of art, the philosopher of art tried to explain the notion of fictional character, fictional entity in the novels. Okay, if you compare the 2 type of fictional entity to the 2 different type of entity, you can see that they have a lot of properties in common. They share many properties. With the difference of one important property, which is the fact that one fictional entity is living, the other one is a non-existent property. The one fictional entity, the future generation, will live in a certain time in history. The other, for example, Madame Bovary, had never exist. So they have something in common, and I think that we can treat in more or less in the same way. And the other thing I would like to suggest is the idea that we fear sensation towards fictional character we read in our novel, for example. We feel a lot of different sentiments. When you read the story of Antigone, for example, we feel, and this is a common experience, I think, we feel pity, we feel love, we feel compassion, deep compassion for that women. And this means that there is a sort of empathy that is possible between fictional character and the reader. And this was also the theory which was explained by Aristotle when he tried to explain the meaning of the catharsis and the way in which we perceive catharsis when we read novel. So we feel that particular sort of sentiment which are very, very common to the sentiment felt by fictional character. We have one different. We feel love, we feel pity, we feel compassion, but we know that as a reader we are in a different world, because we know that we are in an artistic sphere. Okay, my idea that we can treat our relationship with fictional entities more or less in the same way. We can be in an emotive relationship with these fictional entities like future generation. The only point is that it's necessary that we have to draw a sort of narration which can include the fictional entity inside. So, in other words, we have to construct a narration about our relationship with a fictional entity, which are future generation, including the fictional entities in our vision of the future world. It's something that the younger are already doing. Think, for example, to the people who try to do something in the Friday for Future or in all those kind of manifestation. They have an idea of future generation, and they are trying to explain why future generation have to be so important in our society, in our vision of the future society, and at the end of the day, in our philosophy. So they are still constructing this sort of narration. And this allows us, all of us, to have a sort of empathic relation with future generation.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And perhaps to close out our time together this morning, we can dive a bit more deeply into this idea of the imaginary. You write in your book that memory and imagination correspond to past and future respectively, and that the combination of those two elements is what creates our present experience. And another thing that contributes to this argument is the presence of ghosts and ghostly projections. So in using these ghostly figures and ideas, whether they're past or future, how do they help us healthily balance the processes of remembering versus forgetting, of dwelling on the past versus building the future, and of course, perhaps most centrally to your book, fulfilling present needs and enabling future generations to do the same?
Well, it's not an easy things to do. I think that of balancing our relationship with past and future. But as you mentioned before, we can try to do this. We can try to do this job using at least 3 human faculty, or human way of approaching some problems. And these faculty, to me, are memory, as you said before, imagination, and empathy. Okay, using all these 3 one combined or separate, depending on the situation, you can put these things together. What about memory? As you know, memory is a complex faculty of human beings, especially of human beings. And as Friedrich Nietzsche explained very, very clearly in his production, memory is that memory has 2 faces. Okay, on one side, using memory, we can retain some of the most important aspects of our life, or we can retain some of most important action we did in a certain point in our history. But on the other face, we can also exclude something from our life, and we can exclude everything we don't like, everything which is which is judged as not important. We can exclude bad feeling and other things like it. So this means that everything in every situation we use memory, we are creating and we are interpreting the reality. Okay, if you think again to our fictional entity, we can say that we have at least 3 different types of fictional entity. Person died, person who are not still with us, fictional characters, like characters in the novels, and the third one is the notion of future generation, the entity of future generation. The relationship we have with the died is a relation in which we use memory in most of the cases. We feel a sort of connection between us and those person, and we feel that using memory we can maintain the relationship with the died. In the case of fictional character, we use in most of the cases imagination and empathy, because we are in the position of imagining new world, new perspective using that fictional characters, and we are in the position of comparing our life with the life of those fictional characters. And in the end of the day, I think that we use the same faculty, imagination and empathy, in order to have a possibility to construct a relation with future generation. Because in this way we can construct a new world or imagine a new world, including future generation and including the way in which we hope that that new world, the world that we can construct, could be good for us.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today to discuss your book.
Thank you.
And thank you all for joining us and watching in.